The topmost floor in the city. Hoseok, 10 May, year 22. My narcolepsy occurred anytime, anywhere. I collapsed without warning while working and blacked out suddenly on the street. I pretended that I wasn't so concerned about it in front of those who worried about me. I had never told anyone that I couldn't bear to count to 10. I always ended up having dreams about Mom when I blacked out. The dreams were all alike. I was heading somewhere with Mom on a bus. I was excited and cheerful. I read the signs that passed by, watched her profile and kept fidgeting. I was about 7 in my dreams. Then, it suddenly crossed my mind. Mom had left me. I was 20 when I realized that. Mom was still sitting in the seat in front of me on the bus. She looked exactly the same from behind. When I whispered, "Mom," she turned her head as if she heard me. Her silhouette glimmered against the bright sunlight, and her hair fluttered in the wind just like at the amusement park that day. The saddest part was that I knew that I would awake from this dream if she turned her head further and looked at me. I tried to tell her not to turn around, but my voice failed. I kept trying to shout, "Mom, don't turn around, don't turn around." But she always turned around and looked at me. Just when our eyes were about to meet, everything turned white and the pale fluorescent light on the ceiling of the hospital room appeared. It was the same today. When I opened my eyes, the first thing that came into sight was the fluorescent light on the ceiling. I was changed into a patient gown. The doctor said I seemed to have had a concussion and needed a more thorough check. I was moved to a 6-person hospital room. I felt exhausted. I always felt exhausted when I regained consciousness. Jimin, 11 May, year 22. I was transferred to the surgery ward about 2 weeks ago. At first, it felt strange to see people coming and going so freely. Soon, I found that it was just another part of the hospital. There were patients, nurses, and doctors. I was given drugs and injections. All in all, it was about the same as the psychiatric ward. The only difference was that the surgery ward had a longer hallway with the lounge halfway down. Of course, there was one more major difference. I was allowed to freely roam around the ward. At night, I sneaked out of my room and wandered around. I jumped and danced in the lounge and ran down the first floor hallway at full speed. These were simple joys that weren't allowed in the psychiatric ward. One day, I discovered something strange about myself while I was running down the hall. At some point past the kitchenette and emergency staircase, my body just came to a grinding halt for no reason. I still had about 5 more steps to reach the end, but I stopped and was unable to take another step. At the end of the hallway was a door. The door opened to the outside world, outside the hospital. The door had no off-limits sign, and no one came running to stop me, but I just couldn't go any further. I soon found out why. That was the stretch of the hallway just like the psychiatric ward. As if a line was drawn on the floor, I came to a stop at exactly that point, where the psychiatric ward hallway would have ended. They called me a good kid in the psychiatric ward. I sometimes had seizures, but mostly I was obedient. I smiled and went online without anyone being the wiser. And I knew my limit. The hallway of the psychiatric ward could be covered in 24 even strides. When I was first hospitalized, I was 8. I cried and demanded to go home with Mom, holding on to the iron door at the end of that hallway. I frantically tried to open the door until the nurses came running and gave me an injection. For a while, the nurses tensed up whenever I stepped into the hall. Now, no one paid attention to me even if I ran down the hall and reached the door. I already knew that the door was locked anyways. I just kept running down to the door and coming back. I no longer begged them to open the door or wept. But the world is full of people more idiotic than me. They held and shook the door endlessly. They were suppressed by the staff, given injections and tied to their beds. If they had behaved just a bit more acceptably, their lives would have become much more comfortable. Those idiots didn't know any better. I wasn't like this in the beginning. I was also dropped senseless by the sedatives forcefully injected by the nurses and got caught trying to escape from the hospital in early days. I called Mom, crying violently enough to go hoarse several times. "I'm not sick. I'm okay now. Please come and take me home." I stayed up all night for several days, but Mom didn't come. When I was taken to the hospital after they found me unconscious at the grass flower arboretum, my parents didn't ask any questions. They ignored the fact that I had blacked out there. It was the same when I developed seizures. They hospitalized me, discharged me after some time, and transferred me to another school. Family reputation was important to them. A son with mental illness was unacceptable. I didn't become a good kid overnight. There was no dramatic event or memorable incident. I just continued to give up on myself bit by bit, just as a fingernail grows. I stopped crying and longing to go outside at some point. I stopped dashing towards the door down the hallway. I attended school in between hospital stays, but I knew I'd be sent back eventually. It felt refreshing to look up into the sky and enjoy the fragrance of each season. But I tried not to hold them in my memory. They'd soon be kept from me anyway, friends too. A history of mental illness was not helpful in making friends. There was one exception. I met a group who felt like true friends. It was almost 2 years ago. I tried not to remember them, but I couldn't help recalling those days. I had to part with them after I had a seizure at the bus stop after school. The last scene I remembered was the window of the grass flower arboretum shuttle bus opening. That's when I blacked out. The last scene I remembered was the window of the grass flower arboretum shuttle bus opening. That's when I blacked out. When I opened my eyes, I was at a hospital. Mom was over in the corner talking on her phone. My mind whirled for a while. I didn't know where I was or how I got there. I gazed around and discovered windows with metal bars. Then, it all came back to me. The blue sky I saw on my way home. The silly games we played at the bus stop. The arboretum shuttle bus coming closer, and the glares through the bus windows. I shut my eyes, but it was too late. The front gate of the arboretum appeared before my eyes. It was school picnic day in first grade. I was running through heavy rain with my backpack over my head. A warehouse came into sight. The door was left open. I stepped inside. The sticky, musty smell, the sound of my heavy breathing, and the screechy metallic sound. I sat up in my bed and screamed, "No, I don't remember. I forgot." Mom came running, calling out to someone. I shook my head violently. I swung my arms in every direction to get rid of that smell, touch, sound, and sight. But the memories came flooding in. The dam that had held them back the past 10 years collapsed, and every detail of that day surged through my mind, eyes, cells, and nails as if it was happening again. I had a seizure and was given an injection. The drug flowed through my blood vessels and I quickly dozed off. I closed my eyes and wished that this was all a dream and that when I awoke again, I wouldn't be able to recall anything. The wish was just a wish. Instead, a cycle of seizures, injections, and injection-induced sleep that felt like falling off a cliff continued. After I awoke from that sleep, my whole body felt like it was covered with mud. Mud that looked like blood. No matter how hard I tried to wash it off, that warehouse smell lingered. I scrubbed until I bled, but it still felt dirty. When the doctor asked me about it in a concerned tone, I trembled and apologized at first. I repeatedly said that I was sorry, it was all my fault, please let me forget all about it. Then I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't remember anything. So I gazed at the doctor and smiled. I don't remember anything. Did the doctor actually believe me? I wasn't sure. But what was important was that I became a good kid. My life at the hospital was peaceful. It was an ideal place to idle my time away. I didn't long for anything and didn't feel constrained, scared, or lonely. That was until last night, before I met Hoseo again. I was transferred to the surgery ward because I fought with the idiot who kept trying to get to the door at the end of the hallway despite the nurse's constraint. Both of us were injured and were put into 2 different rooms on the 5th floor of the surgery ward. I was put in a 6-person room. My bed was in the middle and patients on either side changed frequently. I woke up in the middle of the night. The patient next to me seemed to be having a nightmare and continued to groan. The groaning sound came from the bed on my left. I pulled the blanket over my head. I was sick and tired of nightmares. I didn't need to hear this. I tried to put up with it for a while, but his nightmare went on and on. Finally, I got up and stepped over to his bed. I tapped his shoulder and tried to help. It's okay, it's just a dream. I found out this morning that that patient was Hoseo. I drew the curtains for my breakfast and Hoseo was sitting on the bed next to mine. He seemed glad to see me again. Was I glad too? Probably in one corner of my mind. He had hung out with me and taken care of me, a transfer who was a complete stranger at school. He also took the long way home with me after school. I still recalled the days when we used to walk home with popsicles in our hands. But he was also the one who saw my seizure at the bus stop before I came here. He was the one who brought me to this hospital. He must have run into Mom. I didn't want to explain my situation to him. I got out of the room with my meal left untouched. Hoseo seemed to follow me, but I knew every corner of this hospital. He couldn't catch up with me. I roamed around the hospital all day long. From the stairs I saw the others, even Jungkook, when they came to see Hoseo. They hadn't changed much. All that afternoon I climbed up and down the stairs and hung around on the other floors. I leaned against the window at the end of the hallway and counted the passing cars. I grew upset. I had skipped all my meals and there wasn't anywhere to sit and relax comfortably. It was annoying to hear the peals of laughter coming from my room. I got angrier because I couldn't figure out why I was so angry. I came back to my bed late at night. "Where have you been?" he asked me casually. Then he handed me a piece of bread. It must have been because I was starving. The bread was warm and delicious. I couldn't help confessing to him that I had long been confined in the psychiatric ward, that I was briefly transferred to the surgery ward but would be sent back soon, that I wouldn't be discharged in the near future, that, as he witnessed, I was a person who had seizures on the street, that I was a patient who might be dangerous. I didn't want to add the last part, but I thought it would stop him from criticizing me. He paused for a moment, then he took away my bread. "Jimin, don't exaggerate. Don't you know that I have narcolepsy? I can black out anytime or anywhere. Am I dangerous too?" He took a bite of my bread. I just froze, not knowing what to say. Then he said, "What, you want this back?" He bit into the bread again and returned it to me. I took it back right away. He asked me again, "Are seizures infectious?" "Narcolepsy isn't. Don't worry." He hadn't changed a bit.